Uh, Dan talked about hope deferred. Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And in bold, the dream that seems to drag on and on, the delay that can be depressing. And I've been there myself, and many of you have probably been. I was thinking about career. Sometimes maybe you don't immediately get what you want in your job, your family. Maybe you haven't found that person yet. Maybe you found them, didn't work out, and you haven't found someone again. Maybe you're not meant to be married. I remember Pastor Scott used to talk about they wanted children and just waited and couldn't, and eventually adopted, and they were blessed. And that was a great testimony. If those of you who have been here when Pastor Scott was here, we saw that unfold before our eyes. So I don't know what that is, why you sat there this week, but that was kind of the review from last week. Next slide, please. And Dan talked about hope deferred, and he talked about three things, but the one I want to focus on is when we try to run ahead of God. That's a lack of patience. Abraham and Sarah was a story of impatience. It was a story of them sleeping with the servant girl, getting ahead of God's plan. Not running away necessarily, not running with the enemies, but yet getting ahead of where God needs to be. They ran ahead of God. And I want you to envision for me, go ahead and next slide. And I'm going to be saying that because we don't have the controller, so I apologize. I want you to envision a race. This whole thing, I want you to envision yourself in a race this morning. I want you to have that word picture in your brain. You see, we are called to run towards God. Hebrews 12:1 tells us, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked for us. In 2 Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I'm going to tell you right now, I am the wrong guy for this message. This is like having an arsonist teach fire safety. Truth. Next slide. I love this. How many of you want to be more patient? Be honest, raise your hands. Maybe you're already patient. Like I said, I am not When Renee saw that I was going to be speaking on patience, she just gave me that smile. And I know that smile. Like, really? I said this morning, I used to be the most impatient person in the world, and I'm not exaggerating. I've gotten better. I've gone from being terrible to really bad. In 5th grade, I'll never forget this, Decatur Public Schools, I went to Decatur Public Schools. And I told you to envision a race, right? And so they had this district-wide race, and I was fast, so I got nominated. You could nominate 2 boys from every classroom in the 5th grade, an entire Decatur Public School system. And I could run. That's the one thing I could athletically do. I was fast. And so I got nominated for our class to go to this big park, and there were hundreds of kids, all the fastest kids in Decatur. But it wasn't a 100-meter race. It was like 2 miles. And I'll never forget this. And I go there, and there's people everywhere. I don't even remember the park. And they line us all up, and you know what I did? I took off. And I was in first place for about 100 meters. And I was smoking the entire Decatur Public School system. And I lost badly. Bad. I finished at the bottom. I'll never forget. And then I'll never forget, and then rounding that corner and thinking, oh my goodness, and then just walking. I was not patient then. Renee will tell you about a time we went to McDonald's, and it was after a game, and I was hungry, and we stopped out at the Argenta McDonald's, and they were two, I'm going to tell stories, so please don't think bad of me. And I was so impatient, I ordered, and we were waiting, and I guess I just left. I just Just take off. What in the world? My phone I thought was off. It is now. And just Friday night, we were going to Jameson's game, and we were in Pana, and this is how I've grown at least. And we order our food at the counter. We're going to sit down. We're ahead of the time. And make a long story short, 15 minutes later, our food's not there, and other people who went in front of us are going right up. Oh, they order 8 things, and they hand it right to them. We're like, what? And so we finally went up there, and they had cleared our order. And the guy standing behind me was probably in his 70s, and he came over. He's like, yeah. He says, you were before me. I'm after you. I haven't got my food either. And we're like, this is interesting. And he says, hey, patience is a virtue. No lie, that happened Friday night. Am I right, Renee? I think patience is a lot about delayed gratification. If you want to write that down, that'd be good. Delayed gratification. We sang this morning that we are to wait on the Lord, and we were told that it's better one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. If we have that perspective, then patience is easy. If we really believe, and man, that hit me hard, better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere, then we're willing to wait. You see, I think it's a symptom of not aligning our perspective with God's perspective. It's a symptom of some other problem in your life. It is for me. It's a symptom of non-alignment all the time. Like a sore throat says you have a cold. If you have that this morning, then you have a symptom in your life like I do with something else, and you got to fix it. You see, Saul went back to wanting to kill David, right? We heard that testimony. That message was fantastic. Because his perspective, at first he aligned it, and then what? Got it wrong again. Right? Next slide. Thought question. I would want you to write this down, and this week I really want you to try to do this this is an essay assignment. No, seriously. So journal on this week. What happens when we get what we want when we're not ready to receive it? That's an original thought for mine. God gave me that this week, and I think I want you to seriously this week sit down and write to yourself, or at least think about this. I don't have an answer. I want you to think about it yourself. What happens when we get what we want when we're not ready to receive it? I had a discussion with a coach friend of ours when we were driving down to the playoff game, and we were talking. I said, if I had $40 million, I would not give it to my kids until they're 50 years old. I'm serious. I wouldn't. I don't think I would. I think I'd wreck their life. I don't think, if I had got $40 million when I was 30, I don't know what kind of person I'd be. So what happens when we get what we want when we're not ready to receive it? That's a thought question for you this week. Next slide. So the big idea this week was to run towards God. That's our big idea I want you to think about in this race that I told you to think about. Run towards God. And in the book, in the studies that we did this week, the key question was, how does God provide the help I need to deal with stress? Number one. The key idea was, I am slow to anger and endure patiently under the unavoidable pressures of life. And the key verse, as we read, was Proverbs 14:29. You see, with regard to the key question, God's desire is for all of us to walk in the path of patience. All of us. We should be slow to anger. Why? Because we're going to face those things again. Under the unavoidable what? Pressures of life. Life is not going to be easy. It's unavoidable. You're going to keep facing those things over and over again. You see, the verse I'm going to read this morning, 14:29, says, and I think as a young man I was told this by a pastor, and he said, young men, and this I think applies to women, especially young men, read a proverb a day, if nothing else, just to make yourself feel guilty. Read a proverb a day. This one is, a patient man has great understanding. I think of my great-grandfather when I hear that from Missouri, whose Jameson's named after. A patient man has great understanding, but a quick-tempered man displays folly. In other words, he acts a fool. Oh boy. You're looking at a guy who got ejected from a football game. Yeah, it happened. Right, Renee? Yeah, it happened. Apparently, when you call an official a clown, it's not a good thing. They don't like that. It's funny now. Oh well, but you have to watch the game from the school bus. Next slide. And the best part of that story is, when that happened, my son was student teaching at Shelbyville, and it happened at Shelbyville. And the very next day in the lounge, they're all talking like, yeah, A&M's coach got ejected last night. And they're all talking about it, and they're like, do you know him? And James was like, it's my dad. Proud son moment. When should I be patient? We have 3 things. These are things you can write down. And I'm going to read the scripture first. You cannot read that. I apologize. It's more for me than you. So if you want to write this down, James 5, 7 through 12 is an important text today. James 5, 7 through 12. James 5, 7 through 12. I'm going to read the whole thing, and we'll come back to it. Here it is. Be patient, then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop. We're seeing that right now. Patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Verse 10. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Verse 11. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So number 1 is, you can write this down, when our circumstances are uncontrollable. That's number 1. When should I be patient? When they're uncontrollable, unavoidable. Because we're told, for example, farmers, can you control the rain? They can't. They know it. And God speaks of it in that way. Just as a farmer cannot control what's going to happen to his crop or her crop, we can't control what's coming in our life. We have to wait for the harvest. It's uncontrollable. Number 2, when I should be patient. Write this down. When people are unchangeable. This is hard for me. Those officials did not see it my way. When people are unchangeable, you cannot change them. Verse 10, it talks about the prophets. You see, they were not listening to them. They were preaching, and some people weren't listening. But the prophets remained what? Patient. Even though they couldn't change some people. Verse 10. You can't always change people. I don't know what that looks like in your life. You cannot change people that don't want to be changed. I had a sociology professor. He was not a Christian, but I never forgot this. And he said he had an adopted son. He adopted the boy when he was 3. And he would tell us all these stories. And his son was arrested and in trouble. And he was like 16 and at Charleston High School. He just come tell us. And he's like, you know, I finally come to the realization. He's like, I'm a parent. I've done everything I can. And he said, I'm telling you. He says, you can't control your kids if they don't want to be controlled. He says, they keep telling me, just tell him this. He's like, he has nothing in his bedroom, nothing. We took everything out, and it doesn't fix it. He chooses this. He leaves when he wants to leave. What am I supposed to do? Lock him up? It was so sad. But that's a part of patience. And I learned a lot from him. I think he was a good dad. I don't know him, but I had him for 2 different classes, and I felt so sorry for him. Be patient when people are unchangeable. And number 3, be patient when problems are unexplainable. That's verse 11. When problems are unexplainable. Job could not explain what was going on to him. You all know the patience of Job story, right? All these terrible things happened to Job. Terrible, unspeakable things. You see, he was the wealthiest man that ever lived. He had everything going for him. But in a 2-day period, he lost everything. He went bankrupt. His children were murdered. He got an incurable deadly disease with pain. He lost his family, his friends, his finances, physically, socially, everything. And one day his wife comes to him and says, "Curse God and die." God allowed the devil to take everything from him but his nagging wife. How about that? Everything. It's unexplainable. Job didn't know why that happened. So that's number 3. Next slide. So why should I be patient? 3 things. God's in control. Verse 8 tells us that. You be patient and stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. Nothing is going to stop the Lord from coming. Nothing is going to stop that. God is in control of history. Nothing will change that. He's in control. That's why we should be patient. Number 2, because God rewards patience. In verse 11, as you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. It turned okay for him. The second half of Job's life was more blessed than the first. God doubled everything for him. God rewards patience. And the third one is because God is working things out. God is working things out. Romans 8:28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. In every circumstance in your life, God is working. Be patient. Often behind the scenes, we do not see these things. He's working things out. You see, the Lord is compassionate and merciful. The whole time He was working through Job's life, and Job did not know what was going on. A delay does not mean a denial in your life. A delay does not mean a denial in your life. We want it, and we want it when? Now. I really wanted the McChicken Friday night. I was better at it, but what was it, 5 years ago when I was sitting in that drive-thru, I really wanted the food because I was hungry, and we just had a game, and I wanted it, and then I was so stupid, I just drove off like an idiot. We have to be patient, because what if we get something when we're not ready for it? I mean, if you're not ready to be married and you go off and do it just because you want to be married, is that a good decision? If you want to have children and it's not the right time, if you get too much money too fast in your life, you take the wrong job because you get in a hurry, I could go on and on and on and on. So that's the thought question. What happens when we get what we want when we're not ready to receive it? Next slide. So I came up with some things here. Remember to approach life like a race. And here are the 4 things. I know there's lots of lists, but just, you don't have to write them all down. I like organization that way. I think that way. Do not let others interrupt or interfere with your race. Do not let others interrupt or interfere with your race. If someone's running a long race, they are focused. They're not going to stop and talk to somebody, right? I think of the funny thing, I'm a Seinfeld guy. You know the guy where the guys run the marathon and Kramer's got the hot, and the people stand aside with cold water for him. And the guy's running by and Kramer has like a hot coffee and thinks he's going to hand him a water. The guy drinks it and scalds himself in the middle of a marathon. Don't let others interrupt or interfere with your race. Who's seen that episode? No, I'm talking about, few people. Do not let circumstances alter your track or path. Circumstances could be anything. Maybe God is preparing you, I don't know what it is, for your job, and if you take it too soon or don't, For years, I always wanted to be, I had several things in mind that I wanted to check off in my life, and I just make it simple: family, career, not necessarily in any order, family, career, and being in the right faith community was always those three things I always wanted to happen. And it took forever for us to see those things all kind of come together. Like it seemed like we'd be in a faith community we liked, but we didn't have kids yet. Or we'd be in a faith community we liked, but I wasn't in the job I liked yet. Does that make sense? Like it was hard for us to understand it. Man, we would like all those things to align. Okay, but I see now, I think that's why some of us more experienced people, and some of you are way more experienced than me, I mean that in a nice way, are way more patient, right? Right? Because as the older you get, you've seen it all. You're like, yes, I understand that, I get that, I've seen it happen in my life. And so learn from us older people, the younger people. And I need to keep learning. Third action point: understand what the end of your race looks like and keep your eyes on that. Understand what the end of your race looks like and keep your eyes on that. When I was in 5th grade, I was immature and I took off and I ran 100 miles an hour for about 150 meters. Not realizing that I had, what's a mile, 3,200, I had 3,000 meters left. And the fourth one is, this is probably the most important, is understand your purpose. Your purpose in life. Understand your purpose in life. For all those four, I'm going to go through one scripture for each. So next slide. So here's a scripture that tells us, do not let others interrupt. Galatians 5:7. You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? You let people cut in on you? It's easy to buy into that rat race. The social expectations of marriage, the social expectations of children or job or finances or whatever it might be. You might not be ready for that new car. We get in a hurry. We think, oh, we need this. I have to have this now. Next slide. Do not let circumstances alter your track. Psalms 119. I run in the path of your commands, for you have broadened my understanding. Do not run off course. His commands are your course. His commands are your course. His commands are your what? Course. I could tell a funny story. One of Lexi's and Caleb's runners, they're the cross-country coaches, and I thought this was hilarious. And this student athlete had a lot of success in the younger levels, so when they go to the high school, when you're a freshman, you're not going to win the race, right? So he asked them, hey, how am I going to know where to run on the race, the course, right? Because if you don't run on the right course, you're going to lose, right? And they're like, well, just follow the other people. What if I'm in front? You're not going to be in front. Because you're a young freshman, right? But being on the right course is important. If you're in track and field, you take what, 3 lefts? Right? You don't just keep running straight. You're running 400 meter and they shoot it and you see somebody just keep going. They could be the fastest person. They're not going to win. I know that's a ridiculous example. Right? Stay on the course. Run the right course. His commands are your what? Course. You see, like Dan talked, this all goes together a couple weeks ago, and this is powerful to me when we're given these choices, right? Choose this or what? This. I'm choosing to make a left turn here. And left, I'm choosing to stay on this oval track. I'm choosing to stay on the correct track. When I was a middle school teacher, this is kind of mean, but I think it's funny, but I guess you can decide whether it's mean. I've been told it's mean, I've been told it's funny. It depends on who you are. So my classroom at Assumption is down in the corner, and in the middle of the school is a library. And it's a rectangle with hallways all around it, and mine was on one corner. And when the sixth graders would come to the building the first time, they'd always come down and I taught eighth grade. And inevitably, they would get lost and they would be outside my room, and I always had taught eighth grade. And so I'd say, okay, the sixth grader would be like, I can't find my classroom. Where's Mrs. Coons' classroom? Well, hers was straight down the hallway, so I just said, here's what you do. I said, you go straight and you take 3 lefts, and you'll find it. It'll take you right to it. So they'd walk, take a left, walk, take a left, walk, take a left, and not 2 minutes later, where would they be? Right outside my classroom door again. It was fun. It was kind of mean, but it was funny. And they're like, hey, just walk straight. You'll walk right into her room. That was probably an once a year thing. Do not run off course. His commands are your course. Next slide. Understand what the end of your race looks like. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way to get the prize. When I was in 5th grade, I did not run in such a way to get the prize. I went way too fast, way too soon. Everyone who competes in the game goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. The consequences of this are eternal. Understand what the end of your race looks like. If you do that, all these little things become kind of petty. Again, that's why people who are older, I think, realize after 80 years of that, none of that really matters. Next slide. Understand your purpose and remind yourself of it. I've already said that once. Understand your purpose and remind yourself of it. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Can you visualize this? Someone beating against it. Have you, when we condition kids over the years in sports and coaches, you know when they're tired, because what happens? They start running like this, right? Or they're bobbing their head up and down or whatever. They're not running with the correct form. And that's what I visualize here for us. Strike a blow to my body and make your body my slave. Don't be a slave to your body. Those carnal, physical, all those things, desires. Because your body's going to say, I want that cheeseburger now. I want to be married now. I've been dating this girl for a year, and for this flat out say, we want to have sex now. I don't want to wait. Delayed gratifications. Don't be a slave to our bodies. Understand our purpose. Next slide. We are to, that's the big idea of today, run toward what? God. Not away. Not ahead. Toward. You see, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I have never been I'd say I was fast. I was fast for 100 meters. I've never been a good long distance runner, and it's probably because of my patience. I don't know, maybe it's my biology, but I've never been able to run. I don't understand the pace. I don't understand it. I'm not trained right. But that's a good metaphor for life. It's a marathon, not a sprint. A marathon, not a sprint. Anybody ever run a marathon? No. My wife's ran a half one. Proud of her.
I did.
Half marathon?
Full.
Full? Awesome. Did you just run and we'll make this a participation? Did you sprint from the beginning?
I was very, very slow the whole time.
You finished. Good job. I can't imagine doing that. I can't imagine doing that. Let's pray. Thank you for this message, God, that you've given to me, for myself,